because you get it drilled into you every day. And that's the incredible thing that censorship had. When everyone heard one point of view in the media and the news they read, the radio they heard, the television they consumed, every time there were pro-government, pro-state messages, pro-Hitler messages, pro-Mussolini messages, pro-Stalin messages, that made the people way less likely to rebel. And that's why censorship was so incredibly effective. One political party was a big factor of this. There was no political opposition to the communists, the Nazis, or the fascists. The communists was Stalin's party. Mussolini's political party was called the fascists, and Hitler's political party, again, was called the Nazis. Like, obviously, that's kind of a no-brainer. A huge part of why these people were able to be successful with the opposition. Opposition would kind of break the censorship mold. People would hear things critical of the dictator, and the dictator would slowly begin to lose his grip on the absolute power in the country. People were supposed to put the needs of the state before their own needs. That was a big part of it. Respecting the state, putting it over yourself, serving the state at all times. That was a key principle of fascist dictatorships. They eliminated opposition, which were people against them, by using a secret police force. For Stalin, it was the Cheka. For Benito Mussolini, it was the black shirts of the fascists. And Germany was the SS under Adolf Hitler. So they also used propaganda, which was a message to influence the way people thought. Again, linked to that censorship part of it, just all hearing good stuff. Censorship is kind of more the stifling of other opposing voices, and propaganda is more the penetration of good voices, positive voices for the person in power. Censorship is you can't say anything bad. Propaganda is just the constant saying of something good. The important thing to know is that Hitler and Mussolini were able to come to power because Germany and Italy were facing severe economic problems such as inflation, unemployment, that like people's lives just sucked. Like they didn't have any food, they didn't have their money meant nothing. They didn't have anything to do all day, and they were just starving. They were really pissed off, and they wanted someone who would promise to put them back into power no matter what the cost. And for both countries, Mussolini and Hitler spoke to those basic concerns. People wanted to live comfortably before anything else. They didn't really care how they got there. So totalitarianism under Joseph Stalin, we're going to examine this a little bit more here. Stalin was a totalitarian dictator in the Soviet Union. The region wants you to know this about him. He was established a command or communist economy. This is an economic system where the government, instead of individuals, owns businesses, makes business decisions, and sets prices. So pretty much if, for example, the government was so big that it sold you everything from like it owned the local convenience store, it owned the shoe stop, it ran the trains, it does run a lot of the schools now, but all the schools were government run, obviously, again, allowing for more propaganda at an early age, supporting the one dictator, the person in charge. So that kind of absolute control over absolutely everything. So the government said, okay, you want to pay $5 for this this jar of jam? Okay, that's what it's going to be, $5. If you want to pay $6, if Mussolini wants it $6, it'll be $6. Like, that's just how it works under if Stalin wanted $6, it would be $6. So yeah, that's the way a communist economy works, and that's the way Stalin had it. And it wasn't really good for the people on the ground who were actually living it, because they had to pay quite a lot more, and there were obviously food shortages and stuff like that. Stalin tried to modernize the industry and agriculture of the Soviet Union by setting economic goals for every 5 years that weren't always successful, but he was forced to. He was really forced to he forced his people to do some pretty drastic things to get up to him. People were forced to work, and if they disobeyed any kind of orders, they were set to these gulags, these labor camps, to force to force the issue and make sure that Stalin met his 5-year plan so that he could see or he could show to the world. Because remember, you got propaganda, no freedom of speech, censorship. There was no real truth about the dark underbelly of what was happening in the Soviet Union, which was people being forced to work, people were starving, people were barely able to put food on the table for their families, if at all. And because of censorship and because of the propaganda that was getting out and the lack of real journalists that were getting in, people assumed everything was all right. And it really, really wasn't, especially in the early solid days of the Soviet Union. So, yeah, we now turn to World War II. So we're going to start with World War II, the second major global conflict of the 20th century, closely linked to the second one. It was fought this time in Europe and on the islands of the Pacific Ocean. It took place from 1939 to 1945. So here's some of the events leading up to World War II. Japanese aggression. Japan was incredibly militaristic. They took over Korea, Manchuria, and much of Southeast Asia in order to gain natural resources like coal and iron. The rape of Nanjing, which is a brutal event in which Japanese raped and killed Chinese civilians or non-soldiers. So people just weren't doing anything. And the Sandy of Nanjing was a major human rights violation, which Japan kind of got off a little bit easier on than they should have because of circumstances that we will discuss later on in our series, probably. It was just an absolutely awful event. It was kind of represent the militarizing or the increasing of the military of the state, the glorification of state through state Shinto. Pretty much the emperor is godly. We have total control over everything in your life, and Japan is supreme. Pretty much that's what kids were taught. That's what adults believed all throughout Japan in the lead up to World War II. Italian aggression. So all these fascist powers were really coming on the aggressive side lead up to the World War II, provoking some response for some of the countries. So Benito Mussolini invaded and took over Ethiopia, a country in Africa, the first colonial conquest since really ever, actually. So yeah, that was a big step forward for them, and it kind of increased Italian nationalism, saying, look, we can take over a country. Yeah, we can do it too. Germany, we could do it too. Great Britain, we're just as good as you. So that was a big deal for them. Also, German aggression, our third fascist power, making some big moves in the lead up to World War II. Hitler built up the German military, blatantly violating the Treaty of Versailles, which, remember, said no more military buildup after World War I, because you guys started the last war. Hitler placed soldiers in the Rhineland, an area between Germany and France. He took over Austria and Czechoslovakia, which were huge violations of the Treaty of Versailles and acts of major aggression. Some could even say acts of war. Regardless of the Treaty of Versailles circumstances. With the Treaty of Versailles circumstances, it was just shocking that Germany would do this at the time. World War II took place because very little was done to stop Hitler, Mussolini, or Japan. The League of Nations was an international organization created after World War I in order to prevent war, and absolutely failed to stop Hitler, Mussolini, or Japan for being aggressive. One of the main reasons why was because of the policy implemented by especially people like Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain before Churchill was, in the lead up to World War II. He said after Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference in Germany, Great Britain said, okay, sure, Hitler, you can have Czechoslovakia, it's okay, but just don't do anything else, okay? At that moment, Hitler was sitting back. He said to himself, you know what? I'm probably going to be able to do whatever I want with this because they will not budge. Like, they just gave me all of Czechoslovakia just because I put my troops there. That's how much they desperately want to avoid war. This is pretty incredible. I mean, I think I'm going to go through with it. I'm going to invade Poland. And that's what was the bridge too far for some of the Western powers. Britain and France declared war on Germany in 1939. So yeah, invasion of Poland started World War II. Poland was quickly defeated because by Germany because Poland lacks natural boundaries, very flat plains that were easy to conquer. That got France and Great Britain into the war. the U.S. kind of knew they had to get into it, but really didn't want to because World War I was quite devastating for them. They'd want to get into war, so it was a strong anti-war movement before any kind of war takes place, but they recognized definitely the threat of Germany. But one thing pushed them over the edge. That was Pearl Harbor. As I'm sure you all know, Japan launched a surprise attack against the U.S. This event brought us into World War II. The Regents want you to know that Hitler failed to conquer Russia, the Soviet Union, at the Battle of Stalingrad because of the harsh climate and large size of the nation. The same was true of Napoleon Bonaparte 130 years earlier. I think we talked about that last episode. Yeah, we did. And now we're talking about this conquest 130 years later in the episode next. So kind of funny how it works out like that. Geography has always been Russia's best defense. The D-Day invasion was the beginning of the final Allied push against Germany. It resulted in the eventual defeat of Germany. It was a turning point in the war where the Allies really, really won. The Allies were France, Germany, Russia, not Germany, France, Russia, Great Britain, United States. France, Russia, Great Britain, United States. So the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were on Japan. Japan, Italy, and Germany were the three powers fighting against the Allied powers, and Japan was the last one standing. First Italy was defeated, then Germany was defeated shortly thereafter, and then Japan kind of kept fighting because they viewed it as absolutely disgraceful to surrender. You just could not do it. So they kept going, and the U.S., in order to stop the war, dropped two atomic bombs in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is the final event of World War II. The U.S. dropped those atomic bombs. Japan just couldn't go on. They had to surrender soon after. Meanwhile, though, little do we know while this was going on, but as U.S. troops started to make their way through Germany, Poland, all these areas that were conquered, they found out evidence of probably one of the worst genocides ever, the Holocaust. This was the event in World War II where Hitler and the Nazis tried to kill all Jews in Europe. 6 million Jews and 6 million non-Jews were killed during this event. The Holocaust is an example of a genocide. The attempt, obviously, to exterminate an entire group of people, just as the Armenian genocide was. So how did they respond to this? How did they respond to all the crazy events of World War II? Well, the countries formed the United Nations. The UN is an organization that was created after World War II in order to solve international problems like poverty and disease and prevent future wars. 191 nations, almost the entire world, all currently belong to the United Nations. The UN is made of 6 main bodies. 4 of them are the Security Council, which is meant to keep peace between nations, which only select few countries are on. Some of the founding members, some of the most powerful countries. The International Court of Justice, which settles disputes between countries. The General Assembly votes on the key policies of the United Nations. It's represented from all countries, kind of like a big Congress or Senate type atmosphere. The General Assembly. Yes, the General Assembly. The Secretariat is responsible for the day-to-day administration of the UN. And out of the UN, they formed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was a document created by the United Nations that lists all rights that all people should have within their nations. This includes the right to freedom of speech, the right to life, the right to participate in government. And these are rights that many countries still try to follow today. So out of this, the Nuremberg trials came in response to the Holocaust. So 19 Nazi leaders were executed or sentenced to imprisonment as a result of crimes against humanity, which was genocide, the mass killing of Jews. Nuremberg trials were important because they demonstrated that individuals in government could be held accountable for their actions. Like, this was a pretty big deal. Like, the world together could team up to say, this is not okay, this is unacceptable, you will be punished. It was a big show of force for these countries. And meanwhile, in Japan, things kind of got off a little bit easier. There was definitely some punishment faced, but not nearly as severe for crimes like the rape of Nanjing, the use of poison gas, because obviously the crimes were not as severe in Japan as they were in Germany. But the thing was, they weren't really as harsh punishments because Japan really wanted, U.S. really wanted Japan as a friend to fight against China, which had recently turned communist. They wanted to prevent Japan from turning to communism and have somewhat of a buffer state there in between. Speaking of communism, that's what Cold War is all about. And that's what we'll be talking about on our next episode of Regents Review here on the Global Podcast.